Councillor Durberg.
Yeah, thanks. Just picking up on your comment about sending people onto the online gambling, and you made a comment there on Facebook revenue from online gambling, one of their major sources. Where's that information come from? I haven't seen it mentioned before.
It's common knowledge. You look at any of the online the revenue reports that come through, and they detail the various websites that provide it, and Facebook's certainly a major revenue driver for them.
Cool.
Councillor Barker.
Yeah, I'm a little confused with what you told us. You told us that online gambling is increasing rapidly. It would seem that it's probably the biggest competition to you. But the anomaly is, if it's increasing, is it not having an effect on the problem gamblers? Because the problem gambler numbers have come down, whereas the online's going up. It's a conflict in my mind. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I think there's a real issue with being able to hide the online gambling thing, whereas the gambling in a physical environment requires you to go from home, to be absent from home from a period. It requires cash to disappear. You're in an environment where there's staff that are tapping you on the shoulder and making referrals to you. It's a lot easier to disguise it and hide it when you're just sitting in your bedroom or your home doing it on your credit card. And there's not necessarily the pamphlets in front of you and the signs on the wall showing you exactly where you can go and get help.
So you're saying that there are an awful lot of problem gamblers from online gambling that we don't know about?
Absolutely. And we're now really seeing not only this exact replica of our game machines, which you can play on your iPad and your iPhone, but also video games that our kids are growing up and playing now, where you get the game for free and you get these loot boxes and these various elements that are effectively de facto gambling. The emergence between gaming and gambling now is absolutely huge.
Yeah, just a quick question I've got. When I was reading your written submission, paragraph 40, I think 41, sort of talking about this online gaming. Are you able to point to some report or some evidence that backs up you're able to rely on in that statement?
The statement that people
if
move
a reduction in gaming machine only directs gamers to offshore-based internet gambling.
Yeah, you just need to look at the amount of money now getting spent online gambling. You need to look at the amount of advertising that's poured into it, the amount of apps that are available for online gambling. Just need to look at even our own TAB's model now. The New Zealand Racing Board, the TAB, has gone from setting up physical TABs to now closing them down and just providing a world-class, fantastic app. That's just happening.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Mr. Murray, from the Lion Federation.
Ngā mihi koutou i ngā rangatira o tēnei huhunga. Kia ora koutou katoa, i ngā reo, i ngā mana. Tēnā koutou katoa. So, yeah, my name's Murray Reid. I'm the Chief Executive for the Lion Foundation, and on behalf of the Lion Foundation, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. So I'll go through my presentation and talk about some of the stuff you've already heard before. So what I'd like to do is just start with a bit about the Lion Foundation to give you some confidence that previous submitters have indicated that we've been around for a while. So just to give you some confidence that we are an organisation that is well established with some good procedures and policies in place. We were established in 1985. I report to a board of 6. We've got a staff of 25 and we have 4 regional grants committees. These committees are set up throughout New Zealand to ensure that the money generated in your communities are distributed back to your communities. We have 1,700 machines throughout 127 venues, so we're a relatively large organisation. Since the start of the Lion Foundation, we've distributed about $850 million of your money back to your communities. And we look broadly, our return to the communities is spread across sport, about 40% to sport, 30% arts and culture, 15% to health and 15% to education. But the reality is you could argue that, you know, community arts and culture might be educational health as well. But so those are generally where we like to, we look to put that funding. So just as a bit of an indication about the support or the funds that have been returned to your communities. In the last 18 months, the Lion Foundation, through the support of the local venues that we have relationships here, we've been able to return about $1 million to over 108 organisations in Nelson. So if you were to look, if you were to dig deeper into those organisations, there's a heck of a lot of people that benefit from the funding that's generated out of these machines. So it's about $1 million in funds, but there's a heap of money that goes back in GST and duty and stuff that Jared mentioned before. So the organisations we have a relationship within your region, and some of you may know these venues: 623 in the city, New Steakhouse, Wakatu, Taylor's Bar and the Postboy, which is just Postboy Hotel, which is just new to the Lion Foundation. So we have a fairly good relationship with people in the Nelson community. So broadly speaking, our submission suggests, we don't think that a sinking lid policy is probably the best thing to do, and you've heard a lot of discussion about that, so I support that. One thing is that you could look at a situation where it's governed by your population base, and this concept has been considered before in other TLAs, but essentially we think that reducing the number of machines in terms of return to community, we don't think that's a good idea. We do support, of course, as you heard, prevention of locating machines within areas of high deprivation. That's absolutely common sense and the right thing to do. And equally, as Mr. True mentioned before, a limit of 5 machines at a venue, we wouldn't support that either. So just a little bit about funding, just to give you an overview of the funding that Class 4 gaming provides to New Zealand in general. It's $330 million to local communities every year. Now that's just funding out of the overall pool. As I said, a big chunk of that goes back to the government. It does make a positive difference in your communities, and a gentleman who presented earlier, I think, gave you a good view of that. We're not hiding from the fact that it causes harm, absolutely not, and I'll talk to you a bit about that shortly, because we take that very, very seriously. But on the other side of the equation, it does do some good things in the community in terms of the funds raised. It is your money. We return 90% of the funds generated from your community back to your community. The other 10% is put into a national pool, which supports some of the bigger organisations like St John's, Plunkett and other larger organisations like that, which of course, without which a lot of communities would suffer and arguably people would be hurt. The point I made before, we are well governed, we are socially responsible, and we are committed to harm prevention. As I said to you before, all of the societies that operate in our sector, all 35 to 36, are committed to harm prevention, and in fact we're regulated very strictly on that. And on that note, and Mr. True mentioned it before, and you'll probably hear about it again, staff training around harm prevention is probably the biggest job we do. So we have, the Lion Foundation has about 12 staff throughout New Zealand, and probably the biggest function that they have is to go into the venues and train in harm prevention, recognising harm. I think the point was made before, if you're gambling online, you just don't see it. If you're gambling in a venue and you're displaying the symptoms of harm, there are intervention measures, and that's what we're trained to do, and we train the venue operators we work with to do the same thing. So as I said, the regular venue training and harm recognition and harm minimisation. We work with the problem gaming agencies, and we also work with the DIA around that. Regular inspections of venues, that's both by our staff and the Department of Internal Affairs. Mystery shopping exercise is a big one. We work with the DIA around multi-venue exclusion mechanisms, so to the point that was raised before, if we identify harm or someone presents with harm, we go through a process of excluding them from the venue so that they can deal with the issue. And as I mentioned before, one of the key things that's been developed recently is a mystery shopper exercise. You don't get that in online gaming. Regular audits by the DIA, so the last full audit we had about 2.5 years ago, we had a total of 12 DIA staff audit us for a period of 6 days. So you can be fairly comfortable that everything we do is fairly well regulated. And equally, there's controls on the type of people who come into the sector through the licensing regime. As I said to you before, the sector's been around for a long time, so it's fairly well established. We've talked to you, you've heard the stats on problem gaming, problem gambling in New Zealand, so I won't go over those. What I will say, and I keep saying to you, it is highly regulated and it is a major feature of what we as gaming societies are committed to preventing. We don't hide from the fact that it causes harm, and in fact we do everything we can to address it. But you put it in perspective, 85 or 80 to 85% of New Zealanders gamble, call it what you want, 0.2 to 0.4% of them have a problem with gaming and gambling. You've seen the stats, so gaming machines since 2003 to 31st or end of last year have reduced probably by about 30%. So the number of gaming machines is going down. The incidence of problems associated with it are broadly staying the same. In terms of commitment to that, we make a direct contribution, and that's just TLF or the Lion Foundation of about 1.27 million a year. As a sector, Class 4 gaming, it's probably 16 million a year towards problem gaming in terms of supporting those agencies that look to prevent it. You mentioned, so there is a massive growth in worldwide gambling. Approximately $400 billion was spent during the 2016 period, but the point to that is a massive increase in online gaming. Someone asked the question, where do we get this data from? So this data that we're talking about came from a Wave 4 study undertaken by AUT and their problem gaming organisation, or not organisation, I guess an element of AUT. So these are straight out of that Wave 4 report. They undertook 4 studies over a period, I think it was 2012 to 2014, Wave 1, Wave 2, Wave 3, Wave 4, fairly comprehensive. There's a lot of data in there. I think the last report was about 130 pages, but it indicated that online gaming is growing. And I can tell you now, as a person who's been in this industry for the last 5 years, there's not a heck of a lot of control on it. $400 billion growth in it worldwide. So, digital technology. That's the area I would suggest, as Mr. Truder, you probably need to look at into the future. And research shows that it's 10 times higher for those who play online in terms of the incidence of problems. I thought I'd just give you a quick breakdown because I found that presenting to councils, there's a little bit of some people have an understanding or don't, but in terms of GMP, the money, GMP's less just, or GST goes into your bank, but generally GMP is what you're left with after the money that's put in the machine has been paid out to players. So if you put in $10 into a machine, 90% of it roughly will go back to the player as prizes. We are left with 10% of that. And broadly speaking, that's how it's split. 15% goes to GST, 20% goes on duty. So the government's a pretty big winner out of this. 16% goes back to the venue operator's payment. 1.5% goes to problem gambling. So if the industry turns over about 850 to 900 million a year, 1.5% of that goes back to deal with the issues. By law, we're required to give back 40% of that to the community, but most societies operate at about 42 goes back to that community. So 40% of $10, $4 goes back to the community. And then you're left with about anywhere 5 to 7% to operate the business. So from our perspective, there's no margin for us, and there shouldn't be. So in summary, I guess the question you've got to think about is, and there was a great question about considering the harm that comes from this activity or any activity. But what I'm hoping you see is that it is a well-constructed and a well-managed industry. Yes, it causes harm, but there's a huge commitment to dealing with it that's been developed since 1985. The positive is this is the only sector of its kind, or the only industry of its kind, where you return money from gambling, other than tax and duty or whatever else, to the community. So I think, you've got to weigh that up. It's well regulated, well looked after. Yes, there is harm, and we deal with that as best we can, and we work with agencies to sort that out. But if you put it in balance, the return to your community is significant, and the benefit to the thousands of people is fairly significant as well. And I think the data shows that prohibition is not going to work. And you saw some of the stats there that, so if you want to get rid of gaming in machines, that's fine, but it will migrate somewhere else. And so that's kind of an issue you've got to weigh up. But we are committed, our sector is committed to preventing harm. And we pay a lot of money to support the government in doing that, but equally we're very committed to making sure the money comes back to the community. Thank you.
Any questions, Councillor Skinner? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think for the presentation, near that grid chart, 40% going to the community. So does any go to, that's going back into what's taken out of Nelson community, comes back into Nelson community, is that right?
Broadly speaking, yeah. So I mean, the general law is 40% back to the community, but so that's back to New Zealand as a community. But what we in most societies,
Sorry, not Nelson, the community back to New Zealand.
back to New Zealand. So the law says 40% of your GMP must go back to the community in general, so the New Zealand community. But what most societies do is aim it back to the community where it's generated, because that's the fair thing to do. We draw a little circle around the venue we've got a relationship with, and we land it back in there. And then we also, and a lot of societies do that, we'll run recipient forums to try and generate.
So what I'm trying to get my handle on is money's taken out of the community.
It's not taken out of the community.
That's all being put back, and what's not being taken is
So less your gist, 15%, less your duty, 20% less, 16% to the venue operator, which goes back into the community. Less about 5 or 7% to pay for us, about 1.5%. The other 40%, broadly speaking, is landed back in the community.
Nelson community rather than, say, the Christchurch community.
Well, yeah, Nelson will get pretty angry with us if we gave the money to Christchurch. And so you can see that because we're required by law to put all our grants up so that you can see that.
Yeah, question of clarification. I was just trying to find the page number, but now I've lost it. I think you opposed the 100-metre ATM rule as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar reasons that Mr. True indicated, really.
But that's been in existence for quite some time, and it appears to be working in Nelson. So why are you opposing that?
Well, pretty much the same reasons Mr. True said. These days with technology, you know, the prevalence of ATMs, say 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of technology around like EFTPOS. But the reality is as technology has developed, and that was touched on before, the issues you're trying to address become irrelevant. I mean, these days, you've got a phone with an app, you're off. So it's kind of like, you know, someone mentioned before, anyway, so that's
Does the phone with the app allow you to get cash?
Well, these days,
from the supermarket or from anywhere?
Well, in time it will, absolutely. Yeah. And you can transfer cash on your phone and internet banking, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Reid.
Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Next, New Zealand Community Trust, Ms. Tanya Hodges.
Fair enough. No, that's pub charity. NZCT. That's the one. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I'm Tanya Peages from New Zealand Community Trust. We're the largest gaming trust in New Zealand, and we have a couple of venues here in Nelson. I'm just going to run through the major points of my written submission, just to reiterate where we stand on these issues, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. So we know from the latest national gambling study, Wave 4, that most people gamble for entertainment, and around 75% of Kiwis take part in gambling as a form of entertainment, so across whether that's lotto or gaming machines or racing or anything else that they might be interested in. So gambling in New Zealand is mainstream, widespread and generally socially accepted. So our position on your policy is that we would like you to maintain the current cap of 273 machines. We think that's appropriate. We'd also like you to add a broad relocation clause that specifically allows venues to move for reasons of their own, so to move to new premises, as Jared has explained the reasons for that, and also when they're forced to for reasons beyond their own circumstances. We'd also like you to remove the 5 machine limit on new venues, and I think the reasons why for that have been adequately covered, so I won't repeat those. And again, we also support the removing of the prohibition on being within 100 metres of an ATM, again for the same reasons that have already been outlined. As Murray's already explained, our sector is regulated to protect community interests. We have good transparency and governance in the sector, largely because we're very heavily regulated by the Department of Internal Affairs. And we do offer harm minimisation on behalf of communities within our venues, and there's a very long list of all the measures that we have to abide by in the back of my submission if you're interested in seeing those in a bit more detail. We've already seen this graph, but it's just to reiterate that the big decline in gaming machine numbers over the last 15 years or so has really made no impact on problem gambling, which has stayed static at around 0.5% of the population and is now down to 0.2% according to the latest national gambling study. So yeah, there is no one yet has managed to make a statistical correlation between pure reduction in gaming machine numbers and a change to the problem gambling rate. So NZCT, we've returned $884,000 to Nelson City in the past 12 months, and the total return is roughly $4 million a year that comes back from gaming trusts to this region. As we've already heard, there's a substantial problem gambling levy in place. In the last 5 years or so, that's amounted to about $100 million. And that goes to the Ministry of Health to pay for all of its various services and research and various other things that it does. And we recognise that it's a balancing act for councils to balance potential harm from problem gambling with the return to the community. And between 2003 and 2018, almost 10,000 gaming machines have been removed, as you've seen from the graph. And that's reduced community funding by about $60 million in 2018 compared to what would have been available in 2003 every year. So it's taken a big chunk of the funding out already, and if we continue to reduce gaming machine numbers, that return to the community is only going to get smaller. We support relocations as a positive thing. Jared's already outlined the reasons for that, but just to quickly reinforce those, it is a harm minimisation measure because it allows venues to move out of high deprivation areas, and what you've proposed with your relocation policy restricting relocations away from high deprivation areas is something we would support. It also supports your local hospitality businesses and jobs, allowing venues to relocate rather than disappear, keeping those jobs there. And it also allows the council to respond to future demands. I mean, nothing doesn't change in this world, so it allows the council to respond to things like urban growth, rezoning, and changes in your demographics. And it also allows appropriate benefit and responsibility to go to the venue operators as opposed to landlords who may have who just own a building and have no responsibility for harm minimisation in that space. And as Jared's already pointed out, the vast majority of councils have a relocation clause, and they generally work well. So that's all I have to say. If you'd like to ask me any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for announcing that. Thank you for your presentation. I just struck this one not quite right with the last presentations, your presentation and the previous to it seemed to show from the graphs there had been a reduction in problem gambling from 0.5, 0.3, 0.2, which on surface looks like halving of problem gaming.
It's actually gone up and down over the years, depending on which sort of research has been done and what it showed. So I think the original research in about 2007 showed it was around 0.5, then it went up to 0.7, went down to 0.2, went back up again. So it's varied in that range between 0.2 and 0.7%. But when you're looking at that over the scale of a whole population, that's actually a pretty small variation, and that's probably just to do with statistical differences between the studies rather than an actual change in the problem gambling rate so much. I mean, when you're talking such small numbers, it's hard to say whether something's actually really going up and down.
Point taken, but I sort of see there's a bit of a halving. There was a time went up on those last previous graphs and going down, and then you've sort of taken an average of that tide.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to pick up on the problem gambling levy, $100 million?
Over 5 years, yeah. Well, it's around $18.5 million a year, so that's getting up to 100,000 over a 5-year period.
Yeah. So, happy. So is it actually going into that area, or is it just going into the government bucket?
No, it's specifically tagged to a very precise range of programmes which the Ministry of Health has to consult on every 3 years. Every time the levy rates are consulted on, they have to come up with a comprehensive plan for how they're going to spend that money, and that's just happened. Actually, they've just consulted on it.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. So that intervention reduction is something I'm interested in. Does that actually end up in each of the licensees' premises? Does someone turn up into your premise when people are gambling and actually look what's going on, or does that actually end up going to the people who say, I've got a problem gambling?
Yeah, a lot of that money goes to problem intervention services, so it will go to the likes of the Salvation Army, Oasis providers at the moment, or Problem Gambling Foundation. So a big chunk of that Ministry of Health funds goes to them, so that when people present, it's the way it works at our venues. If somebody has a gambling problem and the staff recognise that, they will offer them information and help to go to these services to get help and get excluded from the venues. So a big chunk of the Ministry of Health money goes to that. They also do research and a number of other things.
No, great explanation, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the information you've given and the predecessors have given as well in terms of 91.1 cents in every dollar that is spent on average comes back to the player and prize money. I just wonder, how can there be any problem gamblers? I mean, how many times do they have to put that dollar back in again and again to become a problem gambler? If 91 cents in every dollar comes back in a prize.
Yeah, I mean, that is the numbers. But, you know, gambling, you know, for some people is an addiction like drugs or like alcohol. So, yes, some people will be forced into that space.
So they go with their, say, $10 and they spend their $10, they get, every time they put it in, they get 91 cents back. They re-put it in. Is that how you say they're becoming problem gamblers? At the end of the day, they go out with nothing?
I mean, the money is the prize pool for all of the people that are playing. So sometimes they will win, sometimes they will lose, and that's the nature of the game.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tanya, I'm a bit curious about, and it's been a common theme of this, maintaining the current cap at 273 machines. And I'm looking at the policy and thinking that it reflects the demand. So we had a cap, the cap's come down, progressively down, because there have been opportunities to apply for gaming machines, but the applications aren't there. So at 273, that leaves an awful lot floating in the system that aren't being applied for. So can you just explain the rationale for wanting to retain 273 when we haven't had applications coming through, and we're not seeing new venues opening? Is there more demand coming through?
Yeah, that doesn't mean there won't be in future. The thing about where we've got to at the moment with gaming machine numbers is when it was up at $25,000, that was because there was a lot of entrepreneurialism in the system. There was a lot of fat in the system, but that fat's been eroded away now, and we're kind of getting to the point where you're sort of cutting into the meat of the funding. So if numbers keep coming down and there's no room for growth, or there's no room for any new venues, you're going to get to a point where that community funding is seriously being eroded, and the likes of the organisations that Vern represents, they just won't get the funding at the level that they do now. We know that demand is not going away. In fact, if anything, it's getting greater. So, you know, if we cut down that community funding, you're only going to be disadvantaging the groups in the community that need the money.
I understand that, and I just thought, Mr. Chair, but what I'm looking at is, from a trend point of view, what I'm looking at is what you look at from a business perspective as a sunset industry. I mean, that's what on the numbers that we're looking at, because we just haven't had, you know, people wanting to open gaming venues coming through the door. I certainly haven't had one single email on this subject in the entire time since the last time we reviewed the policy, with applicants saying, Councillor, you're terribly unreasonable, Mayor, can you do something about this? There just hasn't been any demand. Yeah, I mean, are we getting to the point where this is, given what's happening online, that actually this is starting to get to the point where it's going to be really challenging, because it is getting to a sunset space where we're enormously grateful and value the contribution that NCCT put into our community. But my concern is that actually the online gambling is potentially going to be the end of this model, and we haven't got anything to replace it with in terms of community funding. No, that's right, exactly, and you know that's a big concern for our trustees. They're already having those conversations. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for the advice.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Scott Gibbons. I'm here representing today the Victory Boxing Charitable Trust. I'm the chairman. Along with me today is Paul Hampton, who's our program director. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to your gaming policy review this afternoon. Our focus is very much on the impact as a recipient in the community, and I've circulated a little bit more information about Victory Boxing, and just really trying to raise the awareness, understand the policy and why it's been reviewed. Our focus is more around the impact of that review on community organisations like ourselves. So my focus is around a little bit of the story around Victory Boxing and its impact today as compared to 5 or 6 years ago, and the heavy reliance that we do have on charitable trust funding providers. So back in 2012, 2013, we were a very, very small organisation that was set up to help some troubled youth out of Victory School. Paul Hampton here alongside us set up a program that was very much out of the back of YMCA gym to help some at-risk kids. So that story and journey has evolved significantly over the years, and we're now a very wide-ranging organisation across youth, children, teens and adults. I think one of the stories that we reflect back on is that organisations like ourselves and our ability to have any impact are very much reliant on external funders and sponsors. And just a little bit of a scale of there, our income to where we are today, we've been up to 75% reliant on funding and sponsorship. And even in 2018, the breakdown's 50% from numerous funding organisations, 25% commercial sponsorship, which is hard, and through activities through the gym's utilisation itself, we've been up to another sort of 25%. So again, the impact of the changes, and I know there's a balancing act between providing a safe policy as well as the impact on the community. Our focus is very much on how we continue to operate, or what are the other options for us as an organisation. So, as I said, back in 2011 we had 20 kids. We're now putting up to 470, 490 children through that program per year. We operate at full capacity. We've only got 1.5 FTEs. 1.5 FTEs sucks up over 50% of our operating budget in itself. So it's a pretty lean organisation, but also the output is significant. We operate currently on waiting lists. The community organisation was primarily around Victory at the time. We have kids, teens, children, youth, adults coming from throughout Nelson and Tasman now. The adult participation has been a significant growth. That's been quite a revenue earner for us. We're up to 246 classes per year, and 20 to 30 people in that sort of space. As I said before, that's $60,000 to $70,000 for us per annum. So that's been significant. I think one of the key things that we've tried to be is very much part of the organisation's fabric to do our little piece. We're not the only organisation that does some very good work in youth and in children and in adult and care. It's about doing our little piece in our little space. There's a lot of collaboration with local police, with at-risk kids. There's a lot of collaboration with organisations. We do some work with, you may have seen it, some adult Parkinson's work. We do some work with also Nelson Breast Cancer Society and the Gynecology Cancer Trust. So that's work that we do to expand the program as more people get interested. We use the vehicle of exercise, be it boxing, to engage people into a hub at Victory Boxing. List of schools: primary, Nelson, Waimea College, Nelson Intermediate, Hamden Street, Nelson Youth, MNIT. The list goes on. Local sports teams, NZ Army, huge wide spread of people that are involved. For a funding organisation, for a charitable trust organisation like ourselves, probably one of the biggest things that we have is volunteers. We have up to 12 volunteers who put over 1,000 hours unpaid through our gym, and that is massive for a little community like Nelson, and that has been a big backbone to our success as an organisation. And what we've tried to do for them through some funding is develop volunteer induction programs for them to screen people that are coming into our organisation. We've enrolled them in skills active coaching certificates, so not only these people are working for the love of the community, for some good of some underprivileged ones or some unfortunate ones, but they're also providing some upskilling in there as well. So a good little story, a good little journey, very reliant on the support we get from community organisations that will be captured by your gaming policy review. Happy to answer any questions. We don't have too many specific queries around the policy itself. It's certainly out of our space of expertise, but as an impacting organisation, certainly would be significant if there were major changes. Thank you.
Questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Scott, and thank you. Doing a great job. It's really good to see. So really, you haven't actually said in your submission, either written or oral, what you're asking for. Can I take it that basically you're asking for the status quo?
Our concern, if this changes, there will be an impact on the volume of funding to community organisations like ourselves, and there's many recipients. And the status quo certainly would, we would know with clarity. And you can see by the volume that's in our P&L, any significant change would put a significant risk to the way that we could operate.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for your report. I like that, and the reason being you'd be a very good example of groups that are out in the community needing this funding. Picking up on Mr. Martin's comment about the running as well and the young athletes. So one part of we have the judges, there's going to be 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 of the community that are excessive harm. And I see a very good stat here on 112. Most of the public do recreation gambling or no gambling problem, well in 95%. So the challenge for us is that little bit of the community that's getting impacted, and we sort of got to then make that call. So the question is, we've got a lot of people who are being assisted, developed, lifted up. I think Paul's a perfect example. He would know them out of Victory and other needy groups. Does that, the question would be then, can we actually say that the benefit outweighs that negative impact on some people? Would that be a call? I'm asking, it's a tough question, but what would you think of that?
It's probably the answer for this group, not us. But look, I know that's a fine balance, absolutely. The goodness where the funds go compared to the harm that may be caused in other areas of the organisation. We have pragmatically tried to build a sustainable backstop as this has become more aware about gambling and the likelihood of funding. And as you see, our percentages have changed. So we are now, 50%, we're up to 75% reliant, and we're just trying to work our way backwards. So don't have your answer, Bill.
So through Mr. Chair, probably a question to Paul, really, because you're the hands-on man down there.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of, like we say, we're open 6 days a week, and you see great impact of what we do down there. We cover a large, we used to start with youth, but now we cover a whole range of people in the community. And each one of those has an individual story. So, I mean, how I answer that exactly, I'm not too sure, but I do know that we make a massive impact throughout the entire community. So,
judgment on us. Thanks for your feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott and Paul. I know you guys do a great job, and I know some of the individual kids, it's been a real turnaround in their confidence, and they're heading the right direction to be good, fine young men, which I have my concerns they may not have. You were mentioning, Scott, 70%, so you're saying you're relying on 70% of your funding from
We used to. I mean, you could, just from the graph earlier there, we were very reliant. So out of our 100,
now
we actively tried to work out,
Could you survive Could you survive tomorrow if there wasn't?
Well, it's 50% of our income today, so no. Short answer.
And a tough question to put you on the spot. Have any of these young fellas or older fellas have come in and benefited from your help, have got that situation of hardship due to gambling in their family?
I guess there'd be a lot of scenarios where there hasn't been any, I mean, for what I've seen, it's more around sort of family sort of dynamics and things. There hasn't been anything come through where gambling has been a major issue why they've needed to come and use us as a facility. So, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, look, thanks so much for coming in today, and thank you for the good work you're doing in our community. It's really great. We have had some submissions around the impact of problem gaming, sort of leading on to domestic violence and child poverty and lots of social issues, which you're probably dealing with at the other end. And so my question for you is, how could we, I mean, I accept that this funding is really important, but how could we advocate to central government to come up with an alternative model so that our communities get the funding that they need without it having to stem from gaming machines? And my second question for you is that you've asked to go, so at the moment we have a 273 as our cap, and we're proposing to go down to 162, but none of the 162 to 273 are being used in our community. Why do you think that will decrease revenue?
Look, we're just raising, you know, whatever changes are made here. So your first question, to answer your first question, certainly, you know, that's not where we're here to try and direct you to. I think there is, we may see very much so the end result of some of those issues with gambling. We may do domestic violence and all the rest of it. Kids in poverty situations without parents, absolutely we see that. I can understand the balance between trying to deal with the issue at the root cause rather than us being at the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I absolutely get that. What that balance is, again, we're here just to promote the fact that if there are significant changes in Nelson's policy, that we may struggle to be able to do what we do, and we might have to downscale. But if, you know, the issues we're trying to explain here today is we're in growth. We are certainly looking at other means of funding through sponsorships and fundraising activities and our own you know, revenue activities throughout the gym fees. Yeah, that's the best that we can do. So the cap moving down, if there's no significant difference in the income available or the funding available for the community, we may not have an issue, but we felt it was important enough to us today, being so reliant on it, and certainly don't intend to have that forever and a day, as we're only 5 years old, 6 years old. Our sustainability is in question at the moment because we're not sure of the security of those funds.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
We've got Harris of Nelson branch. Mr. Harris.
Hello.
Thanks.
Right, well, I don't have a lot to say because I'm sure you've heard a lot today already, but I'm here just to represent the venue operators in Nelson, in the Nelson branch. All of them, as noted in our submission on the proposed amendments to the Nelson City Council's gaming machine policy, do not support a reduction in the cap of the number of gaming machines in the district, nor do they support reducing the limit of the number of machines allowed at new venues. So our members and their staff take the policies and procedures around harm minimalisation very seriously, and on a national level we're working very closely with government departments to ensure that ongoing training will be available to venue operators and their staff. Statistics have shown that reducing the number of machines does not reduce the harm of a very small portion of the community that are affected by problem gambling. There are some very good statistics on this from the link that I sent added to our submission on the gaming machine statistics and research paper. The Nelson district, that from July 16 to June 17, that there were 36 new clients assisted and overall 93 people to sort that sought help for problem gambling out of a population of over 50,000 people. As per the DIA website, the contribution from gaming machines to the community, in our opinion, outweighs the harm, with over $2.7 million that has been put back into the Nelson District community in the last quarter ending the 30th of September. Reducing the amount of gaming machines will only reduce the contribution to the community. So that's all I've really got to say on behalf of the members.
Any questions? Mr. Harris? Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, can you help me with understanding this issue of what I call lack of demand for gaming venues in Nelson? I mean, it's been really static, and you know we've had that float running through there for the last few years, and it's just been, there hasn't been demand.
Yeah, but that's not to say that there won't be demand as the community grows with new business coming in.
Really, I just want to test you on that a bit more though, because I'd say if I was looking at areas where we've seen some real growth and you know activities that have been doing well, hospitality has been one of them. So you know we've had some pretty good years out there in hospitality. You know, and we've had some really tough years. But if we were to look at the credit card data, we know that it's been pretty solid. But what we're not seeing in combination with it is a demand for gaming licences. And there's been the ability to come in and get them, but we haven't seen them. So why would that like to be different in the future? You know, what would cause that to suddenly change now?
Well, why would we want to take away the option?
Yeah, that's right. I'm just wondering if there was a causal reason why, given we've had the opportunity for venues to establish, to come in, to apply, we haven't had the applications. And I have to wonder whether it's marginal at best to operate them.
I couldn't really comment on that, but I mean, like I said, why would you want to take away the option and therefore put obstacles in the way of new businesses wanting to open and to have gaming machines on site? Thank you.
Very, very patient.
Kia ora. Good afternoon, Mayor Rees, councillors. I'm here to speak in support of Tasman Rugby Union's Gaming Fund partners. So the Tasman Rugby Union is an incorporated society that is responsible for the management and administration of amateur rugby in our region at our junior and senior rugby clubs and at our primary and secondary schools. The union manages the delivery and administration of grassroots rugby for 220 teams at 33 affiliated schools and clubs in the region, a total of 6,100 players and 50 referees. In addition to delivering the sport through dedicated community rugby staff, the union provides playing jerseys, shorts, socks and tracksuits, transportation, accommodation and meals for its age grade representative teams, from under 11s through to under 19s, for secondary schools girls, for our senior rep teams and our Māori rep teams. In addition to funding the union, the union requires to keep over 6,000 locals active in sport, each of those 33 clubs and schools also apply for funding to provide playing gear and other services to their members. To facilitate this, TRU and our clubs and schools are heavily reliant on gaming funding. There is just not the number of businesses committed or interested in providing the sponsorship revenue in our region to provide the funding for all organisations reliant on outside support. So, sponsorship is an important part of operating an amateur sports body, but the amount of private funding from businesses and the like does not cover the cost of delivering the sport. So the main gaming fund partners of TRU in Nelson area, that is Mainland Foundation, the Lion Foundation and Pub Charity, are most generous in the support of the local community. Not just sport like rugby, but also education programs for all ages, sciences, arts, cultural events of significance to our people and the region. The number of participants in our programs aimed at keeping kids and youth active is not decreasing, while costs on putting on grassroots rugby programs continues to increase. Hence, we support the status quo of 273 gaming machines to be operated in our region, with the benefits flowing down into the community. From our perspective, it is important that the number of gaming machines be monitored alongside the increase in number of community organisations and growth in participants requiring funding support. That means that the status quo on number of gaming machines allowed, I believe, should be retained at a minimum of 273, with an open mind kept on the potential to increase that number to meet the needs of our community organisations doing work and providing programs for the greater good. I welcome your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I think of myself, and I go back several decades when I was playing rugby. I'm a little fellow right through. We didn't have gaming machines in those days, and...
No, you had communities who did working bees.
There was a greater proportion of people playing rugby than there is now, I perceive.
Yeah.
We did bottle drives, we did all that sort of stuff. Is the community not up to that sort of thing today?
Yeah, the community's changed. They now don't do things like working bees and fundraisers and chook raffles at the pub, and all of those ways that were traditionally used to raise money for their sport and for their children or their favourite programs. I always remember back to 2 elections ago when we had a meeting out at Sport Tasman, and I went there with the point of view that perhaps we ought to rebuild the east side of Trafalgar Park and put in a covered stand with corporate hospitalities. And some mayoral candidates said, well, you know, let's do it. And some said, let's put it into the long-term plan. And one bloke, Richard Osmiston, said, hey, you know enough people, just all get together and build it. And that's the sentiment. That's the sentiment that no longer exists in our community. And of course, we are now totally reliant on sponsorship and the wonderful contributions made by our gaming fund partners.
Thanks for your presentation there, Liz. Well, my question really relates around rugby people. I was one of those middays and having a few beers, and so my question is, when they go gambling, because it's we've got 49% of people gamble without an addiction, we just enjoy it. So my comment would, do they actually see their pulling machine as actually helping fund your rugby program? Are these people going to a rugby pub, for example?
Oh, I think that there is a causal link between, or a relationship link between pubs, rugby and the people who run them. I think we all go and have a social beer, and I'm not one, but I know that some are social gamblers. I think that we have to applaud and thank the 99.5% of those who use gaming machines and do so within their means and do so responsibly. I'm sure smarter men than me and would know how to deal with the 0.2 to 0.5% of problem gamblers, but I think that, yeah, we do know the importance of that contribution to our sport and our activities when you're in the community area.
Thanks.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Next, Mr. Marcus, Pub Charity.
Mr Chairman, thank you. Your Worship, councillors, members of the executive, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We have a small supplementary presentation to go through. Pub Charities operated gaming machines in the Nelson TLA for over 30 years. It's our policy to return funds for local benefit across a broad range of recipients, as evidenced in the attachment to our original submissions. One correction is required from that list. I actually attached an ambulance that's going to be based out in Richmond that was funded from Tasman's money, so really I've deducted that in the slide here summarising the amount of money over the last 12 months. I'd like to focus on just one aspect of the proposed policy, although it is fundamental to its construct and the basis for our opposition to the proposal. To be honest, I'm more opposed to the reasoning behind the policy setting recommended by council staff than the policy itself, and I'm happy to answer some questions later about why that is. We see there's a significant disconnect between the tone of the proposed policy, the justification for it, and the evidence that the proposal will have any effect at all on the purpose and the objectives on which it is based. In a conversation not dissimilar to that undertaken over the decision to fluoridate drinking water, gambling policy is dominated by emotion, convenient sound bites, and a complete lack of supporting empirical evidence considered by decision makers in many cases. This policy proposal is no different to most. No social impact assessment was carried out. Ministry of Health guidelines for policy development were ignored. Expert evidence on the overall impact of regressive policies was ignored. The reality of the modern gambling environment was not considered. There is a slide in the handout that's not in the overall presentation, but simply it's a summary of the Ministry of Health guidelines on setting on policy settings around gambling policies. In 2013, the Ministry of Health, in conjunction with KPMG, produced guidelines for TLAs developing gambling policies. When considered with local census, DIA and Ministry of Health data, it provides a framework to assess public health risk for decision makers such as yourselves. Scores range from a minimum of 7 to a maximum of 30 and are assessed as low, medium and high risk with policy recommendations that follow. As you can see from this graph, basically Nelson scored 12 out of 30 and is considered low risk. Policy recommendations that there are no additional restrictions required other than those already imposed under the Gambling Act, which are significant and often overlooked. Considering the suggestion that the proposed policy is necessary to control the growth of gambling, there are two self-evident problems with that statement. Firstly, as your worship pointed out, there are over 100 machines available under the current policy that have not been utilised. The major reason for this is the current policy is so restrictive they are unable to be applied for. And an example was Pub Charity actually applied to put 9 machines into a venue in the CBD and it was 95 metres from a church. And the requirement was that it would be 100 metres. In a small urban environment like this, it would be almost impossible to find a location that's distant enough to satisfy the council's criteria. And it's something I've never really understood, because a person wandering into a pub is unlikely to have gone there in mistake of heading in for a morning mass. So the idea that there's somehow 100 metres is better than 95 or 50, or even that there could be some confusion between the institutions is well, I think archaic at best. Clearly, in that situation where you have an unrealised demand, the current market and regulatory arrangements are keeping Class 4 gambling in check, so one would question why there was a need for further provisions. The whole argument that these policies control gambling needs examining. This wording, while not taken directly from your policy, is an example from another policy which uses the same phrase. The standard reasons provided is that to control the growth of gambling, minimise harm, and the suggestion that one leads to the other. It's hard to argue against as a value proposition, except it's not true. As far as controlling gambling is concerned, it's not 1986. The state does not control access to all gambling opportunities. It's not like the council controlling monopolies for liquor licences, imposing rates and issuing consents. Gambling is available to the general public through multiple mediums, and that needs to be recognised in these policy settings. Class 4 spending is now only 37% of the total spending, and it's falling. The other category, which includes online gambling, has not been taken into account, and it's growing exponentially. Policy development at the DIA, I can tell right now, is entirely focused on allowing lotteries, TAB and Sky City to respond to online gambling opportunities. There will only be a proliferation of online opportunities, and state-sponsored at that. Clearly they don't fall into the ambit of these policies, and yet that's where the growth in gambling will be occurring. The warning about the inability to control presentations around controlling exposure has been around for some time. This quote's from 2006 from Professor Max Abbott. As far as minimising harm is concerned, evidence has always been present that indicated regressive Class 4 policies have had little impact on problem gambling prevalence. Like a McDonald's meal, it seems like a good idea at the time, it just wasn't very satisfying in its outcome. This quote from Max Abbott outlines quite clearly that even after the introduction of gaming machine limits and caps, there's been no impact on problem gambling prevalence, which clearly is a concern for members here today. An overall summary of the impact of these policies is quite clear on the left-hand side, which is the impact on Class 4 gambling, which has also flowed through to Class 4 funding, of course. So the total number of venues in the country, and machines and spending is down. Now, if that was a medium to control problem gambling prevalence rates and total spending, then on the right-hand side we'd see also downward trends. But there's been no change in the problem gambling prevalence rate in New Zealand since 1999. And the total gambling spend has actually increased over that period by 15%. So not only has the spending from Class 4 been absorbed by other forms of gambling, it's continued to grow. So as a vehicle or a mechanism for controlling the growth of gambling and minimising harm, it's been a total waste of time. And all it's done is actually dismantle our sector to the point where it's quite difficult to maintain the funding levels that we've maintained through the years. The fastest growing categories for help-seeking behaviour might surprise you. It's the other category, which includes online poker, offline poker, other forms of online gambling, and lotteries products at 9%. Herein lies the problem for why these policies don't do what they claim to be done. Problem gambling prevalence rate in New Zealand is 0.3%. Of that 0.3%, 0.2% are relapsed problem gamblers. So there's a cohort of people in the community that clearly are vulnerable. To try and reach through the other 999 people and get to that one person through these sort of methods, well, the evidence is clear. It's been totally ineffective. The nature of the problem is evident. Approaching problem gambling exclusively from an environmental or public health approach has failed, and the reason is obvious. Of the 3 in 1,000, there are estimated two problem gamblers who are relapsed. Reaching the 1 in 1,000 with a specific mental health issue and one behaviour is challenging, if not impossible, because gambling is likely to be only one of their problems. The Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists said approximately 90% of people diagnosed with problem gambling have at least one other mental health diagnosis. The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in the USA stated that almost 73% of pathological problem gamblers had an alcohol use disorder, 38% had a drug use disorder, 60% had nicotine dependence, 50% had a mood disorder, 41% had an anxiety disorder, and 60% had a personality disorder. The argument that you could help this person by controlling in some way impacting on their gambling, is resolving their personal issues, is naive at best. And it's a failure of our health system that we've pursued for so long, strategies that have not delivered. We've spent over $250 million and achieved zero. So what's to do? Specific targeted mental health strategies are needed, not blunt instruments like prohibition. Pathological problem gambling is highly comorbid with substance use, mood, anxiety and personality disorders. Suggesting that treatment for one condition should involve assessment and possible treatment for comorbid conditions. We need to realise the sophistication of this problem and stop treating it in such a simplistic fashion. And this is the result of where we've taken a simplistic approach to problems in the past. I mean, clearly prohibition days, we gave birth to organised crime in America that took nearly 60 years to actually remove the stain of. But more recently, what's happened is when we pushed synthetic cannabis into an unregulated and uncontrolled market and taken over by the crime, we have a series of deaths. And that's the direct consequences of prohibition. that sort of simplistic approach, we'll just ban it and it'll fix the problem. We don't need to look very far to see these examples. But the thing I find most frustrating is, one thing about Class 4 gambling is it's the only product that's unique to a controlled and supervised environment. So all the other gambling products that are available today are either completely uncontrolled and unregulated, right the way through to having options that allow you to participate uncontrolled and unregulated, but uncontrolled but unsupervised. So here we have a community venue where staff are trained to look after the people that participate, and we're trying to get rid of them, causing a migration to more inferior forms of activity. And the other thing about it is this is an activity, this is an activity that produces local benefits, whereas the other forms of gambling don't. And yet we seem to be completely complacent about those in our policy settings. PCL opposes the policy because it's based on bad policy making. If you want more gaming machines, you're going to need to change your policy and loosen up the restrictions that exist. That's why that capacity hasn't been undertaken. If basically you want to meet the need of a growing population, you're going to need to take a slightly more liberal approach. If you're looking to sustain this at some sort of controlled position, this is not the way to do it. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to ask you, and all your information is very laudable, and I understand it completely what you're saying. Are you aware of any organisations like you that have moved into the online gambling area and are able, by getting into it, return to the community? Or are all these online things up overseas and out of the country?
At the moment,
I'm wondering why you're not getting into online gambling if it's...
The law actually prohibits the establishment of online gambling and New Zealand-based online gambling. And again, it's the naivety of the fact that, well, you can't have a server based in New Zealand, so therefore it's not going to happen. So they're all based in offshore. Sky City Lotteries and the Racing Board are all pushing the Minister very hard to expand their online presence. They all have an online presence. They want to expand their offering and their reach because they're saying that the online competition is now affecting them. And of course the government doesn't recover any duty, GST, problem gambling levy, and there is no localised return.
So just to be clear, it is impossible legally to set up an online system in New Zealand?
Yes, other than those that are approved for the Racing Board and lotteries. Yeah, in the TAB.
Thank you, Martin, for Chair. I've had several submitters give me some sort of comfort that when they're in a physical environment, there's trainees to look after the well-being of those potential gambling issues. How is that? How have what? I just wrongly assume that there's a pub there, an organisation wanted to get as much dollar through the thing, and if they draw out some more money, put into it.
Yeah, look, I think it's been a growth curve for the staff, and I think that initially it was, I'm not a psychologist, and as opposed to intoxication, which is a physical representation, it just required repetitive training as to what you're recognising for, and these are behaviours that are signs of deterioration.
So staff are trained or required to be trained to look out
extensively, and their licence is at risk if there are examples where they don't intervene where there's signs of problem gambling.
They'll get in trouble if they... And it's just been the case for a number of years. I can think of situations which don't seem to fall in that category, but that was 20 years ago,
no, this is really the obligation really crystallised around the Gambling Act in 2004.
Okay.
And I'd say probably the first 5 or 6 years, a lot of resistance. We're not psychologists, we're not babysitters. I think there's a genuine acceptance now that host responsibility extends to social responsibility, and that requires observations, record keeping, and interventions.
And one quick follow-up question: has that worked? Are people picking up people that like?
Yeah, look, and we're following it up now with facial recognition technology, which we're trialling, which allows us, for people who've identified themselves, or we've identified them as needing to exclude them. We then now, because it can be tough to recognise people in a busy pub coming back in, so we're looking to ways to enhance that and to support people in those orders, which so there's a lot of effort going into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, you had a very good graph here on my page 5, that one there.
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting, where the spend, the money, the machines are going down, no change into the problem gambling, but the total gambling spend going up by 24%. That seems excessive, considering, to me, it just seems a large number. So that's actually, where's that money going? I don't think the TAB's getting it, because I'm not too sure if horse racing's that. Where's it going to?
Lotteries have had a massive increase, 26% in the last 2 years, $132 odd million. So basically that goes into their coffers, whereas 80% of that is captured by their national funding mechanism. So half of it, well, not 42%, goes to high performance sport, Creative New Zealand, New Zealand Film Commission. Another 40% goes to their national committee, and 18% goes to regional committees. So there is a filtration back to the community. The other increases in the other category, which basically can only be estimated because it's not monitored in any way. But it's really the number of people that are turning up with problems linked to offshore websites. Online poker was a very popular activity, that emerged recently. But there's full-blown casinos. So all the games you find in a gaming room are replicated online. Baccarat, roulette, all the full-blown casinos available. Sports betting all over the world, 24 hours a day. At one point I was signed up to 80 different websites just simply to see what was going on in this field, and it's staggering. And again, the idea that the state through licensing can control community access dates, I mean, this policy structure predates smartphones and broadband. So, and that's the problem the minister's struggling with now of internal affairs about that, saying that is this fit for purpose, because we've just seen a proliferation of access to virtually anything, including gambling.
It's probably a follow-up question then. So all I need really is an iPhone or an iPad, free Wi-Fi on my way.
Yeah, absolutely. Credit betting, no supervision. You could be 14 years old because you just are till you're 18 years old. There's no controls, there's no bet limits, live betting, in-game sports betting.
That's a bit of a concern. We've actually got free Wi-Fi in the CBD now.
Yep.
Mr Chair, just as Martin very helpfully gave me the example of one of the applications and why it didn't go through. Martin, have you got any other examples? Are there any other ones that you're aware of that have come in?
Not that we've personally, but the restriction we've seen in other areas when the size of the town and making sensitive sites restrictive is going to create problems. There is no demand because we can't satisfy the current requirements. I'm not saying, and not suggesting, I don't think anyone's suggesting sort of free rein.
No, okay.
But I think the policy could be looked at. If sustainability becomes one of the key words you're looking at, because controlling the growth of gambling, you're just not. If you want to control class 4, that's a different matter, but they can call it controlling class 4.
Okay, and if I could just get very quickly from you, because you'll know this, can you give me a customer profile of your gaming clients? As you're in business, so what's your profile? Describe your customer.
Well, typically it's probably a person 35 to 55. That's sort of peak earning power, got discretionary income, employed. Probably slightly oriented towards females, probably maybe 55%, 45%. Probably quite a few tradespeople that have cash in the back pocket. I think that there's a range of people that's just simply entertainment right the way through to I'm a gambler and I like to gamble, and all sorts. And really what we're looking for is a deterioration, going back to Councillor's question, from where they start at. So we're looking for a decline in control, which is indicative of problems. So if someone could spend $200 a week quite comfortably on their pastime, well, that's so be it. But if it turns into $400, that's what we're looking for.
All right, okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
We have to have rapport with the players to do that.
All right, and final question is, what is your biggest business risk? I think I know the answer, but I just want to, what do you see as your biggest business risk?
These local government policies.
Really?
Yeah.
Not online gambling?
No, at the moment, online gambling is going to happen anyway.
Right. So
really, it's this effectively sinking lid, which is what it is. You don't come back from that. Yeah. Thank you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this delicate topic. I'm here representing hundreds of sport and rec organisations and members of the community who either are unaware of this policy or can't be here or find it too hot to sit in this seat and talk to. This is a very big lever that the council is potentially pulling here that has an enormous ripple effect on our community. And I believe probably the fundamental question at stake is where is the greater good in trying to tackle these issues? With 9 out of 10 Nelsonians actively involved in sport and recreation, in just about every realm of sport and recreation that we come across, the support of the likes of Lion Foundation, Pub Charity, NZCT, paramount to those organisations surviving and delivering and doing what they do for our community. I would say, just doing a run round some of our many contacts, there is a very big lack of awareness of this policy and its downstream effect. So wherever the council goes, one of the observations and piece of counsel from Sport Tasman is that there is potentially a lot wider consultation that needs to be had than has been had. Certainly the groups, schools that I've spoken to have no idea that this policy is happening, and nor do they know that it will impact their ability to get funding going forward. I've got our submission as read. I just want to summarise that Sport Tasman, we're very supportive of the council looking at these sorts of issues and applaud you on doing so, but we advocate retaining your current policy. We reduce and we reject the reducing the cap on the number of machines and the limit of number of Class 4 gaming machines. The rest of our submission is I will take it as read, and I guess just the last point I want to raise, in sport and recreation as a charitable trust, the social ills that we're trying to tackle, and I'm sure the council would want to join us, are large scale, big community issues. Depression and anxiety that impacts 30% of our community. Obesity that impacts 30% of young children starting school in New Zealand right now. Drugs and alcohol, family violence, housing. These are some of the bigger, wider issues that we believe the sector of sport and recreation plays a critically important role of connecting, creating fun, and healthy, vibrant communities. And to do that, they are absolutely reliant on the millions of dollars that come through in support from the various organisations such as Pub Charity, Lion Foundation and NZCT. So without further ado, very happy to take questions. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Nigel, for coming in. So your submission talks about how 0.3% of the gambling community are regarded as problem gamblers, and that's come up as a point made by the previous submitter and all the way through the submissions as well. But some of the other submissions we've had talk about how just because that one person is a problem gambler, the ripple effect that has on the community around them is far, far greater. So it can actually affect 18, 34 or 48% of the people around them. So up to 10 people around them, their families, their friends, their workmates, their business and their communities all suffer because of that issue. And we also know that the difference between, say, alcohol addiction and other addictions is that it can be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars very, very rapidly. So it's not just something which can be fixed by going to rehab, because the ripple effect can last for many, many years. How do we grapple with that very serious issue with what you're asking us to do, when in fact, over the last few years, the policy isn't actually going to impact on the number of pokie machines currently in Nelson. So the income which is being generated from those and being put into community organisations is not going to change with this policy change. It's just trying to push us in the right direction. So my question is, how do we grapple with the flip side of what you're saying? You're talking about it as being the greater good. I guess I think it's the lesser of two evils at the moment, versus if you compare it with online gambling.
Sure. Well, I guess my first response, thank you for your question, would be if 0.3% have a large ripple effect, what does 90% have in terms of their ripple effect, which is the percent of community that are getting some benefit from the policy as it stands at the moment?
Those people would continue to have that benefit with the new policy.
Well, I guess that is a moot point in this discussion. Is the community of Nelson going to stay stagnant as it is? It certainly looks to be growing, increasing in size, etc. So I would imagine that with that growth in the community will come more challenges that come with larger communities, and I think the role of sport and recreation and other community entities like art, etc., will play an even more critical role on keeping special what we have here, not only in Nelson but in New Zealand, which are really vibrant, connected communities, people engaging and doing great things with each other.
One more question through the chair. If central government was providing the finances which these communities need to do the good work that they're doing, would you be here today advocating for the gambling policy to be retained?
Well, it's a good question it's a hypothetical question that I can only deal with the reality of the world that I'm in and those who I represent are in. So the fact is resources are tight to do what, there's 540 sport organisations across the top of the south. To do what they do is increasingly difficult and they need more support. We do advocate, just as we are in here advocating with this council today, at central government consistently to try and unlock other doors. So unfortunately I don't see the end of that rainbow coming fast.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, because I know I'm not on this committee for allowing me to speak. Thank you, Nigel. I know your organisation, like many organisations, do extremely far-reaching help and support for all sorts of sporting abilities. Number 6 on your submission, I don't quite understand that what you're referring to, Scott. We note that Victory and Stoke schools are 2 decile rated, by comparison Turner is 6 decile. What are you referring to?
Oh, well, it was just, I guess it was a demonstration that we'd read the policy well. So we were just looking at some of the territories that were outlined in that policy for creating, I guess, geographical barriers. And we were just making the point that that not all of those, Tahuna was an interesting area, and we just noticed there weren't any decile 2 schools in that area.
Okay, okay. And the question I've asked, difficult question I've asked some of the other presenters, you offer a lot of support for people that may not have otherwise afforded to be participating in sport. Do you think there's been a greater impact than the 0.3% of people or young kids not being able to participate in sport because of problem gambling in their family?
Well, I'm not a gambling expert, so I can't speak on behalf of that part of the community that's impacted. I can only speak on behalf of those who get the upside and benefit of what we and many sport and rec organisations do around the community, and that is to create a better place to live and engage in activities that involve from the very young to the very old.
Last question. If you didn't have or had a lesser amount coming from lotteries or gambling, would you be able to survive, continue doing what you're doing? Can you adapt?
Well, I guess it's not a nice future to consider, but without doubt there are many things that would have to stop, and that would be to the detriment of this community. I've outlined some of the many things that get, Sports Start, that makes contributions to refugees, lower socioeconomic, to get into sport, sports awards, Weet-Bix Triathlon. There's lots of benefit.
Thank you. Very brief. Do you think Sport Tasman could make a submission to the Nelson City Council's annual plan next year with the suggestions such as asking the council to consider making a remit to local government New Zealand to put pressure on the government to change the system and take account of the things that are happening? And we've had all sorts of suggestions today how it could be much more fairly done, and I can appreciate the problem of online gambling. So do you think you could initiate that?
Yeah, we'd be delighted to work with council on that. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just want to pick up on the point really about your comments, sport and rec, assists youth, a healthy community, and also somewhere to belong, because you belong to a team where you belong to other group of people. When I see gangs, they say, why do I join? Because they want to belong to something. My question really, and that other comment, really, kids in sports stays out of court. So the question is, if this funding was to go, and that, I imagine that includes the tax revenue, so the government has got less money to give back anyway, would the sports groups really be that bad off they couldn't do something?
Well, I note with one of the previous speakers the discussion around volunteering and how the dynamic has changed, and there's a few factors that are driving that. So in this community we've gone from 30% volunteering to 25%. That is continually on a downward trend, and it's driven by a few factors. One, life is far more complicated than it used to be, and it seems to be getting more complicated. Everyone's working, everyone's under pressure. We've got, in the sports sector, we've seen the development of some who get paid on the roster and some who don't. So those who don't get paid drop off the roster and think, well, we can leave the job to those who are getting some money. And it's I guess all the while we're trying to tackle the sector and its challenges, we have these other growing issues which the sport and rec sector is designed to tackle. That is the connectiveness of our youth, the increasing obesity that we have, the high incidence of depression and high anxiety, and I would love to put the cost of all of those together and put them on the table up against the issue that we're dealing here with in gambling to throw some perspective. Just one other question then. So if this funding stopped, and we've heard from the funders, what happens to your volunteers going from 30 to 25? What's the pressure going on then? They've got to run bitty sausage sizzles and bitty raffles. What's going to happen there? What's your thought being that person? Well, my view currently is that one of the reasons for the decline is burnout. So we have less new young people hitching on to, the train of community service. I think we've got 350 volunteers on our books at Sport Tasman, and I would say the average age is 60. We have very few young people volunteering to spend their time. Part of that's just the young person's mindset, which is life's about me, not about helping others. I get that, but as those volunteers age and run out of steam, and not just because they're old, because they get burnt out, I have a real concern that we don't have the follow through to back them up and continue the great work that's going on. Is your volunteer funding when you do the programs to initiate people into doing sports stuff, does that actually get funded out of this? Some of it does, yes.
Mr. Chair, Nigel, You're suggesting to us that we need to get some more community feedback, that, you know, that's where you started your submission today and speaking to us. Can you just sort of help me a little bit in who you think we should directly target? If you think we've missed, if we haven't, because we need to hear from the community to make decisions, it's really important we do that. What you were saying to us is, I think that we've missed hearing a voice, so.
Well, I think that because of the scale of impact from this policy, I think it's important that as a council you know that you've got as many voices as possible. When we've sent out on our database, when we've talked to our, you know, we share our offices with 14 other sports codes, there is a general lack of knowledge of this policy. And and people are confused with the other policy with central government that was going on at the same time yours was out. So I'm not sure if you're aware that was happening. Those who are aware of it, if you say, do you know the impact, they have no idea. I was at a college last night, and they sat in a minute's silence when I said, do you realise that your funding from Pub Charity, NZCT, Lion Foundation may not be as secure as you think because there are some changes. They had no idea. So I guess we can always, all of us can do public consultation better. I just think because of the large impact of this one, my anecdotal evidence is that we need to do some more communication with community before endorsing this policy.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Thank you, pleasure. Appreciate your time.
Take a break. Ms. Murray, how are you? Good. Get underway. We'll take it your submission has been read, so.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm here representing the Nelson Marlborough Health on behalf of the Public Health Service. And gambling is a major public health concern. Last year, the Ministry of Health measured the burden of gambling in New Zealand and found that gambling caused 3 times more harm than drug use disorders and 2.5 times more harm than diabetes. Gambling harms include depression, suicide, emotional and psychological distress, job losses, bankruptcy, relationship breakdowns, crime, and an individual's problem gambling can affect 5 to 10 other people, and it's often problem gamblers' children who are at most risk of harm. 50% of problem gamblers experience family violence. That's from a Ministry of Health report. And children of parents with gambling problems report feeling unloved, losing trust in their parents, not having their essential needs met, finding it difficult to concentrate at school. They're more likely to have alcohol and drug use disorders, experience depression, anxieties, eating disorders, have trouble sleeping, have asthma, allergies, gastrointestinal disorders, and at more risk of developing their own gambling problems in life. So earlier today you saw a figure showing 100 people and one person was singled out, and they said look at how small the problem is, but then if you look at the ripple effect, and it's not just for that cohort of people, it can be across the generations. So the Ministry of Health's 2012 gambling survey showed that there are 84,000 estimated problem or moderate risk gamblers in New Zealand, and an estimated 0.6 children per person with a gambling problem. So we can conservatively estimate there may be over 50,000 children in New Zealand living with problem gamblers at potential risk of a variety of negative effects. Not only that, 80% of those seeking gambling help have thought about suicide. The National Council of Problem Gambling in the US has shown that 1 in 5 problem gamblers will attempt to kill themselves. That is twice the rate of people with other addictions. So if we as a community want to do more about suicide, we need to address the drivers of suicide, one of which is problem gambling. If we're serious about reducing suicide, child abuse, poverty, addictions and mental health conditions in our communities, then gambling availability must be addressed. So Matt McMillan, who was going to speak today, who runs the addiction services for for Nelson, gave me the September 2018 figures for his service. And in Nelson and Tasman, 80% seeking gambling addiction services are because of gaming machines. So these are these pokey machines. This morning, earlier today, you heard a lot from people talking about the problem of online gambling. Those people accessing Matt's services, it's only 2.9%. The problems here in Nelson are from pokey machines. Therefore, we need to reduce the availability of gambling machines in our area. And councils are able to influence the number of machines in their location. So you're proposing to reduce the cap. This policy would still enable venues to relocate and new venues to replace old venues. So lowering the cap doesn't eradicate the problem of gambling in our communities. So given the social and economic harm from problem gambling, especially for those living in more deprived areas, consideration should be first given to a sinking lid policy. A sinking lid policy would ensure there's no more gambling machines in the city centre. Some people may argue that gambling machines may add to a more enjoyable experience in the inner city, but the National Health and Lifestyle Survey in 2016 found that most adults in New Zealand don't believe gambling machines make pubs more enjoyable to spend time at, and only 14% preferred to drink in pubs and bars that had gambling machines. And from the submissions received by the council of those in support of the council's new policy, 83% have requested a sinking lid policy. Just going back to some of your earlier submitters this morning, they were talking about the harm minimisation strategies that the organisations were providing. The Department of Internal Affairs, they run their mystery shopper surveys. They ran some in 2016. From their results of about harm minimisation, only 8% of those venues met the expectations. 59% didn't meet the harm minimisation expectations, and only 33 partially met them. So if we were going to reduce harm, the easiest way for councils to do so would be through a sinking lid. In addition, we also recommend that the existing objective to support and promote harm minimisation principles for gaming activities within Nelson is not removed from the policy. This objective makes it explicit to Nelson residents that councils wish to reduce gambling harms in our communities. The impact of poverty, crime, poor physical and mental health, family violence and household stress all have significant and lasting impacts on our communities. Reducing gambling addiction is part of the solution. Unfortunately, the funding model for gaming machines results in valuable sporting groups and community groups being pitted against the likes of public health. Like you've seen this morning, we've heard so much from people saying how important that funding is, but that funding model is flawed. So as a society, we must have a conversation with ourselves about why we're okay for those most at risk of mental health and addictions paying for, in most part, our social activities. The Health Board is advocating to the government that this funding model is flawed and needs changing, so valuable community groups are not so reliant on money from gambling. We encourage the council and also other community groups to advocate. We will be doing so in the child wellbeing strategy that's up for review, up at the moment for consultation. The public appetite for gaming machines is also changing. The 2016 Health and Lifestyle survey found that nearly 50% thought raising money through gambling did more harm than good, and only 24% of people thought that it did more good than harm. So perhaps people are becoming more aware of the problems that gambling is causing, or they're also concerned about the funding models that takes from one community and gives to another. So in summary, the Health Board would like to see the retention of the objective as listed on that slide, and also the introduction of a sinking lid policy, because we believe these would actually help the council meet its vision in this year's long-term plan that people enjoy living fulfilled lives, and also the mission to shape an exceptional place to live. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jane. Time for some questions. Councillor Bolton.
Oh yes, thank you, Jane. Thanks for coming in and submitting. As you've heard today, we've had a lot of submissions asking us to return to the current policy. Could you just touch on what we've currently proposed in terms of reducing the number from, I think it's 273 down to 162, and 9 till 5 if new venues are created, having 5 pokie machines rather than 9. Can you comment on those, and the 100-metre rule from an ATM? Those 3 aspects of our policy. If we didn't go for the sinking, I understand the sinking lid's your preference.
So if you didn't go for the sinking lid, yes, I think that your default position of reducing your cap from 260 something to 162, thank you, would be the next best option, because you're drawing it back. I don't agree with the submitters this morning of leaving it at that higher amount, because you're only going to increase increase the number of venues, therefore making it easier for people to gamble, especially those with addiction issues. We would agree with your choosing to put restrictions on the high depth areas. we'd want the retention of the 100-metre rule for the reasons that was given in the last round of a few years ago. And we would agree from going from 9 back down to 5. The fewer machines, hopefully the less harm.
Through the chair, can you comment a little bit on, at the moment, the potential would be then that new venues would be in our CBD. Can you talk a little bit about what the risk is to younger people in terms of having addictions into the future? So what that might mean if there's machines in our CBD?
The research has shown us that basically the more venues that are around, the easier to see, the more likely people are going to use them. So if you've got a whole lot of bars and pubs and people have come out and they're drinking and then they want something else to do, they might go into and use those machines. So it is a question back to prevalence. So if they're around, people are more likely to use them.
I'll ask a question then, Ms. Just want to understand the ripple effect, because during the course of the submissions, we've heard figures of anything from 0.0 to 2.0% of the population are problem gamblers. But I'm just wondering, is there any data that you've got access to that you can share in terms of the ripple effect for how many problem gamblers, how many other people are affected?
Our research has shown from Ministry of Health, it's between 5 to 10 people. Mostly families in the first instance, but then you'd have friends, and then also sometimes it could be stealing from businesses or employers. So yeah, it probably depends. It always depends on the individual concerned. Ministry of Health. Yep.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jane, you gave a number before around local figures. 80% of people appearing with gambling addiction services or seeking help were coming from using pokie machines, gaming machines.
Yes.
Is that a statistically reliable sort of number across New Zealand? Have you got any research that would demonstrate, would show that? The reason I'm asking is because, we're watching some real changes in trend in terms of where people gamble and the type of gambling they do. And I'm finding that actually a bit implausible as a statistic as a valid statistical correlation. And I'm just wondering whether it's because there's a greater chance of people being referred through as opposed to it being, correlation between the two.
So the figure I gave you, 80%, that was from the September 2018 figures I've got from Matt. I believe that the similar figure from the Problem Gambling site, but Tina, who's following me up,
will be able to help me with that. Okay, that's good, because that's what I'm just trying to work out. So I'm just trying to sort of get a sense of, in terms of problem gamblers, all those people online gambling at home and doing other things, or track racing and other things, really are they a minor issue really in the scheme of things, and because essentially that's what you're saying to us. If you're worried about gambling harm, this is what you need to focus on, because that's 80% of your problem.
So that's shown in our local figures, but of course that's the people accessing the service. That's when we know about.
Yeah, that's who you know about, and there might be a lot we don't know about. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm just looking up here. The challenge for me really is that I get the idea we've got a harm situation. I get that, and being in the community, we've been supporting those groups. My challenge really is, and the other side of that is, the money out of the poker machines do some good, which is the previous speakers. And if I just take that one example there, you've given me, recommend to you, the long-term vision, people enjoy a living, fulfilled lives. Well, most sports groups would probably say that as well, and even the other ones. So probably from my point of view, is that I get the idea of the gambling, So what do you actually say then to the positive side of this? Is there, because that's our challenge is to weigh, you see the real people having problems, because that's part of the process going through the health system. Like I just take the one there on the, for example, the 80% of problem gamblers consider suicide. Well, that's 3 people and, you know, 80% of that's 2. You know, the number of suicides in New Zealand, that's not surprising to me. I get the number, so I'm not really raised. So just from yourself, so what do you actually say then to the other people who say the gambling money does something good? Can we actually trade one off against the other? That's really where I'm trying to come from.
I think we're in a difficult situation that we now have to trade one off against the other. And that's why I think it's a flawed model. I think in an ideal world that we wouldn't need to. And that's why the Health Board is advocating to central government, we need to change this because this is ridiculous. I mean, rugby, sports, the hospice, these are fantastic groups that do wonderful things for the community. And of course we want to support what they're doing. But these groups are reliant on basically the backs of people's funding that comes from the backs of people's addictions. It's so I was pleased to hear Councillor Barker's request earlier to Nigel Muir about lobbying for change, because I think that's what we need to do, and not just from Nelson. I think all communities across the country need to make a change. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Nelson, because gambling harm is a national issue that continues to damage communities throughout New Zealand, and we want to prevent the harms that occur to society at large, to use the Gambling Act term. We are a counselling service with offices throughout New Zealand, but we also fulfil a broader public health role. And we're here to support the work of Matthew McMillan at the Addiction Service here. There are 19 out of 67 TLAs in New Zealand with sinking lid policies already, which is the best policy available to councils, and Nelson should be one of them. I base a lot of what I'm about to say on Ministry of Health documents. We've got the Gambling Harm Reduction Needs Assessment, which is the 2018 comprehensive document from the Ministry of Health that outlines harm and what the space looks like. It's otherwise known as the Sapir report. Also the Burl report, which was contracted by the DIA. We've also come up with our own gambling report with an analysis of the grants that have been issued in Nelson, so I'll get to that as well. So recent Ministry of Health statements and direction clearly shows that gambling harm occurs in these high deprivation areas, and there's a huge focus on that. The latest National Gambling Survey said estimates that 2% of New Zealand adults could be problem or moderate risk gamblers. So we're talking about 2%. The industry seems to be really good at minimising the problem, and they talk about the 0.2%, and that's the really severe end. So we're talking about people who have lost homes, gone to prison. But when you look at gambling harm and gambling problems, there's the moderate risk gamblers, so we're talking about 2%, and that's like 80,000 people in New Zealand. And then there's even more than that in terms of low risk gamblers and the harm that they cause as well. And there's the 5 to 10 people affected others, and our counselling service deals with those people too. Another piece of that equation is that less than 15% of people with gambling problems actually seek help. And this is from the Ministry of Health. So the problem with pokie machines per se is that they are made to be addictive. and they create the dopamine in the brain that that means that other mental illness can be caused by poker machines. It's not just the association, it's actually causal in terms of anxiety and other coexisting mental health issues. People who experience psychosis are 4 times more likely to be gamblers. And you've got your other issues around domestic violence, poverty and crime. So at PGF, over 50% of our clients report that pokies are their source of their problem. If you include casinos, it's more like 60%. But there are differences in terms of ethnicity too. You get a higher percentage when you're looking at Māori populations, obviously. So 82% of people never use pokies, and that's in our submission. But we use that statistic in there to highlight that the huge amounts of money that are generated through these machines come from a very small number of people. So that's $10 million in Nelson last year from a small number of people who can probably least afford it. And this is money that is used for that community funding that we've heard a lot about today. So you've really got to ask yourself, is this an ethical model? It's like the regressive tax, and the Ministry of Health is starting to talk about that a lot, taking from people who can least afford it and giving it to organisations which are often large sports organisations. This council received $21,000 last year, so I would suggest that perhaps Nelson City Council could take a stand and stop receiving pokie money, take an ethical stand, along with Hamilton City Council that has made a statement that they will not receive pokie money, and Christchurch too, I do believe, and perhaps Auckland. According to our analysis around the grants, only about 17% of the losses were redistributed to the Nelson community. It's very hard to track all the funding grants, and some of them go into a national pool and then get redistributed from there. So that 17% doesn't include that, but it's 2 million out of the 10 million. So you have to ask yourself what's happened to the rest of it. Okay, so the spend in Nelson has increased despite machine numbers going down. You'll see that in Appendix 4 of our submission. There's a very clear graph of the spend going up and the machines, well, plateauing now, but they have been generally going down. So all this talk about loss of community funding and reduction of community funding isn't happening, because it's 40% of the spend which is increasing. So this could be used to show that not enough is happening to discourage the use of pokies. The Bill report, which is the DIA report, is the up-to-date research on influences of Class 4 gaming machine proceeds, and concludes that there does seem to be a positive relationship between expenditure and the number of venues that gaming can happen in, and between expenditure and the number of new generation standalone progressive prize machines. Now this is the jackpots and how they're hooked up. So spend has been increasing, and it can be something to do with there used to be a cheque written out if somebody won the jackpot and they got the cash and they could leave the venue. Now it's a number of free spins, and that credit goes on to the machines. So the increase in spend, according to the Bill report, isn't anything to do with GDP, population, employment, earnings, consumer confidence, or international visitors. Now Nelson, here you could do more with your Class 4 policy, obviously. A sinking lid with no relocations or mergers is a clear signal that machines are not healthy for your communities, and as I said, won't reduce community funding at the moment because spend is increasing. The proposed policy is a step in the right direction because you are reducing the cap by 100 machines. However, this will not reduce the number of the current machines, obviously, and there's room in there for 8 more machines. So you could argue there could be an increase in community funding if you get those extra 8 machines. And I mean, we have to commend the council on the proposed location requirements. That's an ethical stance. However, the unintended consequence could be that the venues in those high depth areas will hold on to their licences more tightly, become more valuable, and the harm will continue in those areas. About the number of people moving to online gambling, I sort of consider that a red herring kind of an argument because we're looking at pokie machines, we're looking at Class 4. You're the regulator for Class 4. Central government's the regulator for online issues in this space, and I think we just need to stick with what we're looking at. I mean, there's lots of talk about pokies being a highly regulated environment, but you'll see that DIA is working towards more an educative approach rather than an enforcement approach, and so they're a lot more hands-off, and so really you've got a big responsibility to regulate in this area. That's me.
Yeah, I just want a bit of clarification on page 2 of your submission and under funding. So there the comment is that Nelson City directly received 2.6 million for funding for community organisations from pokies for that period. Now the next sentence is the losses for the same period were 15.1 million. What are you defining as the losses?
That's gross machine proceeds. It's what you'll find on the DIA website in terms of how much is lost.
Does that equate to money that people have put in
Yeah, it's
to those
profits.
machines without them getting anything?
Yeah.
Which is quite
It doesn't include what's given back.
It's just vastly different to
proceeds, yeah.
the 91 cents coming back for every dollar, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know that's regressive too, so it's 91 that goes back in and then 70 comes back and then you put your 70 in, and so yeah. A lot of losers.
So can I just follow up on that point? Is what you're saying is that even though we've heard from all these community organisations and sporting groups this morning saying that this 2.6 million is of huge importance to the Nelson region in terms of supporting our community, in fact the loss from the Nelson region because people are using pokie machines is 15 million. The losses during the same, so that's how much money, because at the start of it you talk about how this money could otherwise be spent in the local economy on consumer products, recreation and social activity. So could it be argued that if people weren't putting money in the slot, they would have more money to actually pay for meeting their essential needs or meeting their family's essential needs?
Absolutely.
I did have one more question through the chair, which there was a graph, which might have, this graph here on page 16, Appendix 1. I just wanted you to expand a little bit because we've had lots of submissions today saying that the problem is the problem gamblers, the 0.6% or the 0.3%. But what you're trying to highlight to us is that there's moderate risk gambling issues and there's low risk gambling issues, and they contribute to a bigger portion of total harms. Can you expand on that a little bit, how you got those numbers 18, 34 and 48%? And also you mentioned that only less than 15% of people actually seek help. So if we know only 15% of people actually seek help, and that comes up with the 0.3, would you expect therefore that
there'd be a lot more
there'd be a lot more harm than we're actually
to gambling
seeing in our statistics? Can you comment on that a little bit, please?
Well, this isn't our graph. This comes from the Ministry of Health. So if you want to dig deeper, you'd need to go there. But there's harm that's severe harm that can affect a small number of people, and there's other harm that is like going without food, or not being quite being able to afford the 5th meal of the week. That's the bigger problem. That's a bigger number of harms, but it's not as severe as the losing your house.
So can I just clarify what you're saying is that the 18% problem gambling are people who have lost their house or they have become bankrupt, or it's so serious that the impact is decades long, whereas the 48% are people who can no longer perhaps provide for their family or meet their essential needs.
Yeah.
So it's a much, much bigger issue than we're perhaps led to believe with this 0.3% statistic.
Yeah, and you'd need to go to the Ministry of Health too to really dig deeper on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, last question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The person to ask the question on the harm reduction or prevention programs that the groups tell us they run, funding out of, I imagine, just another tax on the money going into the machine. Does your group actually find that useful? Are these harm prevention programs at the, dare I say, the poker machines, are they actually effective? What's your thoughts?
You're talking about what happens within venues?
Well, they give money and they tell us that.
Training.
Yes.
Yeah, the host responsibility training. It's difficult to gauge, and DIA gauges it by doing this mystery shopper, which has been messed around a number of times. Like the first time they conducted it, they didn't let the venues know that they were coming. It was actually random and slightly like a proper audit, and a lot of the venues sort of failed and did really poorly. So there's been some communication, because education is the DIA's approach. So they've worked with the industry to adapt their audit, essentially. And so they're lifting the game though, and people are becoming more aware around their host responsibility obligations. But yeah, from a regulatory perspective, it's definitely sort of more in the education space at the moment.
So they have an audit process, which you made the comment, DIA auditing them. So that's kind of effective. I mean, do people actually get a chance of being locked away in a corner and just playing the machine forever? Or does someone recognise that? What's your feedback on that? Can someone just drift away there in no man's land?
There's a lot of feedback that there are clients who go and do that and aren't approached whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tina, thank you for a really thorough submission and for coming in to talk to us today. I just want to get this number sorted out. You answered some questions for Councillor Fulton just around the harm, and I'm looking online at what is the latest document that I could find, which was the gambling report on 2016 Health and Lifestyle Survey, which is published February 2018, and that's the Health Promotion Agency report. So just, so I'm just wanting to be really clear on this. So you've got this graph in your with your percentages on there, so that's the of harm, and when I'm looking at the latest data, I'm looking at, I think, 0.1%, so about 5% of New Zealanders are, around 5% of respondents to the survey experience some form of harm. So I just want to make sure we're consistent in what we're dealing with. So, and I can see from that 3.3% are low risk, 1.5% are moderate risk, and 0.1% are considered to be meet the problem gambler definition. So I've got that right. I'm looking at the right things. I'm not mixing up the data.
I couldn't. If that's not the reference for this graph, then it's not the same.
No, okay, report. All right. I'll just have to sort of work it out. So because I just thought I heard a number that was bigger than that, but what I can see is essentially that you've got 5% responding that they have some individual level of harm, and they go from 3.3, which is low-risk gambling, where they may experience some degree of harm or negative consequences, down to your top ones, which are the ones that meet the problem gambling definition, as 0.1%, or 6,000 people. Across New Zealand.
Is it the HPA survey?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, which I would have thought was reasonably reliable in terms of the data in it. So if I'm trying to extrapolate that out for Nelson, so I'm going, okay, I can do that, can't I? I could be able to work that out. So if we're talking 6,000 people across New Zealand up at that top end of fitting the definition, we're talking, 100,000. You know, relatively speaking, quite a small number at that really high end for Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's...
And I understand the flow and effect, but okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm going to be using the right numbers.
I mean, because as I say, the industry is really keen on minimising that level of harm and pointing out that it's a tiny percentage, and that's not what we see. And actually, there's a lot more to it.
What I'm looking at is the survey results from the Health Promotion Agency, so that should be statistically pretty solid, I think.
Oh, thanks, Nina.
Right. Thanks.
Next, we have Elsie Councillors. Annual Kirsty, thanks.
Hello, thank you for allowing us to come and speak to our submission to the Gambling Policy Review. Unfortunately, we aren't able to have more youth councillors with us today because they're doing exams, but this submission is representative of the submission we put into the Gambling Policy. I'm going to be speaking to that today. Thank you. The Nelson Youth Council sees gambling as a negative influence and a source of harm throughout our community. We therefore endorse Council's proposals to reduce the gambling, including the limiting of the number of gambling machines, and encourage Council to introduce a sinking lid on its gambling machines. In making this recognition, we acknowledge the benefits that gambling offers to the community. However, we believe the overall positive outcomes are significantly outweighed by the harm caused by gambling. This issue is important for youth as well, not only because many are legally allowed to gamble, but also because the gambling's burden is not just on the person who is gambling, but on their family and friends. While we recognize that not all gambling causes harm, a study prepared for the Health Promotion Agency this year cited that over 100,000 people in the past 12 months have been influenced by some level of gambling harm. Furthermore, 22% of the population have been noted to be affected at some point in their lives by gambling or the gambling of others in the governmental strategy to prevent and minimize gambling harm. We see a sinking lid as an important step in line with Council's first aim in the gambling policy, which is controlling the growth of gambling. A 2017 Auckland review of gambling venue policy findings analyzed the effectiveness of the sinking lid policy over the last 3 years and found it successful in both the achievement of controlling gambling and minimizing harm. Overall, we see the long-term value of Council's changes, but we also encourage the value of a sinking lid in supporting Council's aim of developing a healthy, safe, inclusive, and resilient community. We believe this is crucial in fostering the growth of young people and supporting the future of our city. Furthermore, we would also like to make a recommendation to Council in regards to online gambling. While we recognize this is outside the remit of Council's current review, we believe that that action in the area of online gambling would align with Council's key purposes in this strategy. Council clearly recognizes the negative effects, aiming to take action to improve the issue of gambling, as demonstrated through its suggestion of reducing the number of gambling machines in Nelson. We believe that a lack of recognition around the area of online gambling, which the national government has acknowledged as presenting an emerging risk of harm, could potentially foster greater issues for the community in the future. We make this recommendation recognizing the inevitable shift of gambling into online platforms as a result in the reduction of gambling machines throughout the community. We therefore present this proposal encouraging Council to be proactive in its actions towards online gambling and ensure that the aims of the gambling policy are effective in the long term. Because of the lack of rigorous restrictions on online gambling, we see its potential negative impact on our youth and our community as a whole. The potential direct exposure of gambling within the homes of our community is an area of concern, particularly for youth who tend to follow role models and the behaviors they see around them. Furthermore, studies by the Problem Gambling Foundation have shown that online gambling is more addictive and that online gamblers are significantly more likely to become problem gamblers. This is combined with the fact that money gambled online does not return to the community. While we acknowledge the limitations Council faces in the online world and the role the national government is taking to improve gambling throughout our country, we believe Council should recognize the issue currently and the potential future issue of online gambling. We would like Council to take steps to counterbalance the influence of online gambling, and therefore we encourage Council to consider a public communication campaign, in particular considering the youth strategy principle, which states that youth development needs good information. We believe it is important to help educate the public, and youth specifically, about the negative effects on gambling online. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about our submission, and in my capacity as a youth councillor, I will not be speaking to my personal view today.
I'm just curious, actually, with your very full submission, and how you arrived at your views on it. Have any of you experienced in your schools, in your areas, the people who have suffered from problem gambling? Is this one of the reasons that you've come up with such a strong viewpoint?
Yes, absolutely. The submission represents the views of the Youth Council and our peers largely. We not only recognize the influence of online gambling through our friendships and the people we know, but also see its potential effect on us as we move forward in life.
Yes, thank you so much for your submission, and it's a very thorough submission. You've reached a conclusion that you would prefer to go for a sinking lid option. The current proposal looks at reducing the cap, but would allow for an increase in the number of pokies machines, particularly in the CBD, so on Bridge Street, that kind of area. How do you think, as Youth Council and as Voices for Youth, do you think that's something which youth would enjoy seeing around Bridge Street, or do you think the preference is that just keep it away from areas where you're socialising?
We definitely see the value that gambling machines do have to the community, not only in entertainment but also in the money they return. However, overall, we believe it is an unfortunate way to benefit the community because of the fact that of all the activities that people can do, it has been proven throughout the country, and the national government definitely agrees, that it causes a lot of harm. The previous submitters quoted a number of statistics, and not only high-risk gamblers, but also the low-risk gamblers and the people who are having problems is a quite large range of people who actually do gamble. So I think that from our perspective, the more limitations council puts on it, the better, and that's why we propose the sinking lid policy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Question aimed mainly for the youth component, which you helped represent. On the numbers we're seeing so far, we're seeing something between 1 and 3 people on 100 who've got some sort of level of gambling impact, great harm, please. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the online, the piece I want to pick up, and you guys are online most, probably an extreme large percentage of the age group. What sort of numbers out of 100 would you think, just give me an estimate, would be actually impacted on online gambling? Any thoughts?
Unfortunately, because of the fact that we haven't done a survey on the submission, I can't give you any exact statistics, but I believe because of the changing technology, the modern trends, and the convergence between gaming and gambling online, there is definitely a consideration for not only the current gambling, which unfortunately has not been well enough documented. I think this is definitely something that needs to be looked into, but also the potential for it to grow in the future, especially considering that as council and the government imposes restrictions on gambling venues and the such, people will naturally tend to move to online, which is definitely something the council should consider.
That's what I was thinking, and thanks for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nathaniel, and thank you, all the youth councillors for this submission. And you're raising a really interesting concept here that we're sort of grappling with around addiction, in fact. So probably a recognition that within any cohort of population, you're going to have a proportion of people who are going to be have a tendency for addiction, and how you manage those issues. So I'm hearing from you that what you were seeing is a potential growth new area for us across that, and initially you said you're both gambling and gaming. So that, are you seeing the gaming as actually being a precursor in some ways to online gambling?
That isn't specifically what I meant by that comment. What I was meaning more is that in many games, there's actually a connection between gambling and gaming as they progress. I believe, in particular, a lot of things don't currently meet the definition of gambling under the Gambling Act 2003, but are tending to look more and more like that, such as loot boxes or spin to win or etc. in online games. And that's something that definitely needs to be considered along because of the fact it isn't being regulated. Furthermore, as I mentioned, the lack of rigorous restrictions, like obviously people have to put in some restrictions, but there is definitely a potential for illegal use, which particularly affects youth.
Thank you.
How you doing? Got great news. I'm the last. And looking at who you have already seen today, I'm probably the only individual here. And I'm here because it's something I feel really, really, really passionately about. I don't know if I put in my submission, because when I wrote it I was feeling quite emotive. I had a gambling problem when I was in my early 20s. I became addicted to pokies, so I know the damaging effect that it can have on a person. And 20 years later I find myself in the position where I am working as a volunteer for an organisation, charitable organisation, bringing in literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants. And I reached a point where I thought, oh my God, I am actually part of this cycle. By me doing this job, I am allowing the cycle to continue, and it's wrong. It's wrong on every level. And you can read all the statistics in the world, and you can look at all the spreadsheets, but I think if you stop and pull yourself back, then common sense tells you that this is wrong on every level. Pokie machines, can I just say I'm not anti-gambling, okay? I think gambling has its place in any society. The problem with pokie machines is that they are so highly, highly addictive, and they're designed to be like that. And, you know, they, every play, every press of the button, it makes that lovely sound and the lights flash. And I mean, for me personally, I was addicted to the sound of the cards as they whooshed along the front of the screen, and that was my dopamine hit. That's what I couldn't be without. It wasn't about money. I wasn't putting those 20-cent coins in because I thought I was going to win, you know, get a royal flush and win $100. I was putting those in because I needed to hear the sound of those cards going across the screen. And it took me a long time to get over that. And can I say also that I didn't come up on any statistic as being a problem gambler, and I can assure you that the numbers that you're being fed, I mean, really, how do they get those numbers? You know, the way to find out is to actually go down to your local par and go and look at those people sitting behind those pokie machines. And I can tell you that there'll be a mother there, and she has left her 8-year-old daughter at home looking after her 4-year-old brother and her 18-month-old sister, who are now having to organise dinner for them because mum's off playing the pokies. And this is real. This is what happens, you know. And she's not doing that because mum's playing lotto. She's doing that because mum is addicted to pokie machines, you know. And it's, you know, she's just one of those statistics. It's not just the mother that's affected. It's those 3 children that are having to bring themselves up. And I've seen that personally myself. You know, there are just so many other instances, you know, pokie machines tend to, because of they tend to be in these old pubs that are tucked away in these more suburban areas, which tend to be more sort of socio-economic, sort of more deprived areas. People don't go in there necessarily for the money, they go in there for the company. You'll see the old guy that's sitting there that's 75 and he's playing the pokie machines because he's got nothing better to do. It was interesting, I was at the hairdresser earlier today and she told me about her boss, who she used to work for only 2 years ago, and she said every lunchtime she would go to the till and take $40 out of the till and go down and play the pokies. And I'll bet she doesn't come up on any of these statistics either. There is so much that is just being hidden, by these organisations that are funded by that blood money that goes into that pokie machine, because they're supposed to give something like 40 cents in every dollar, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that process works, but it seems to me 60 cents out of every dollar is an awful lot of money that's required to run the allocation of funds. So anyway, so I'll read through quickly what I've got here anyway. So I say the reason that pokie machines, and that I have such an issue with pokie machines, is because they're highly addictive and they are the bottom feeders, basically. They are the worst form of gambling that you can have. They don't just affect the individual, but the whānau, the friends, the community. In 2016, a gaming machine study was completed by the Australian National University. It linked the presence of pokie machines within a postal code to a significant increase in domestic violence. And every year, another commission tells us that the rates of child poverty in New Zealand are unacceptable. Every year, we are told that domestic violence is one of the highest here in New Zealand in the OECD. Every year, we're reminded of our country's appalling child neglect figures, and every year we are asked to get on board and do something. And I'm like, I'm a mum in suburbia, what do you want me to do? Literally, what can I do? Well, this is what I can do. This, by being here and saying to you, this is wrong, it's wrong on every level, stop the cycle. You can make it happen, I can't make it happen, you can make it happen. You need to do the right thing. So, you only have to ask the police and the hospitals about, the damage that this does to society, and all the extra services are required. Now, I understand that you've heard a lot from these sporting organisations that require this funding to survive. But there are other ways to get that funding. They just need to be more creative in the way that they manage it. It's a flawed logic. There's so many that rely on the grants fund. Wonderful organisations, they rely on these grants fund to provide a service that fulfills the need that is caused from problem gambling. I mean, how does that work? At what point do you say, this is wrong, this is wrong? The funding model, it's immoral, it's unethical, and any organisation who depends on this money needs to take the blinkers off and accept that it is blood money. They should turn their attention and look to other forms of revenue. There are other fundraising opportunities. It just unfortunately requires a bit more effort. Grants funding is too easy. I know how easy it is. I know, having done it for so long myself. Stop the cycle is all I ask. Thank you. Oh, no, don't.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in and submitting. I can hear your passion and your emotion about this issue, so I really appreciate that you've taken the time today. In your submission, you say, in my many years of managing grant applications for charitable organisations, I've experienced of venue providers signing off on grants to organisations who will support their business. Theoretically, venue owners are not allowed to exert control over societies or influence grant decision making, but as this is not able to be policed, it is common practice.
Yes, it is common practice.
Are you able to expand on that a little bit?
So I work for a football organisation in Christchurch, and on 2 occasions I was called by venue operators asking how the football club that I represented could assist them and help with their business. And now the people that were asking, the only way that they could have got my phone number and my name is off that grants application, because my name was never, and my phone number was never on any of our website details. So there's only one way that they could have got that, and that is off that grants organisation. And this was a large, the organisation that allocated the grants is a large, you know, foundation in Christchurch. It's not like a little tucked away one, it's a big player. So what the heck they are doing, giving grants applications to the venue holders for them to then determine. But it is common practice, you know, as a football club, if you are applying for money from a pokie machine out of a certain pub, then they're going to want to know how you can support them, you know, as you can imagine.
So might that be by doing a quiz night at the venue or what?
Oh, no. They want you to bring the team down. They want you to bring the teams down after...
Bring the teams?
Yeah, teams, you know...
To play pokies?
No, to come down after the games on Saturday. So the idea is that you come down and you spend money over the bar.
Okay.
And that's your way of contributing. Showing your support.
Showing thanks.
They support you, you support them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's all right. No problem at all. Thank you.
Brian, I wasn't here for that process, so I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but I'm conscious, so just in terms of numbers for a quorum, I'm not here on the 29th of November. I don't think I'm here. Actually, hang on, just let me work that out. When is that? Next week? Following week? Oh no, 10 days, no, I'm not here. So I won't be here on the 29th, so just in terms of numbers.
Well, bear in mind that...
there's not a gaps anywhere. No.
The baseline here, you'll have 3 metres that are unavailable, so... Well,
Today, yeah. And I mean, obviously, as long as you've read the submissions, you're fine to go, but... yeah, and I'm the only one that's not here, so it's, you might have to go with it.
What about the 6th?
6th?
It's getting late, I wouldn't want to do anything later.
Oh, the 6th is a possibility. The 6th, we will be in draft annual plan days, Tuesday, Wednesday, so we just have to be able to be here that Thursday, not, will have to be morning.
6th, yeah, 6th is sports and rec.
We could maybe, yep. Oh, have you got sports and rec on the 6th? Is there? No, you shouldn't do.
There's a sports and rec chairs and deputy chair meeting, that's all, 2:30, 3:30.
The 6th is probably your best option.
In the morning?
Yeah, I've got that. I've got meetings, but I can move them around. So. 6th, I think we should give it a crack.
Cool, I'll leave that with the GA.
Yeah. We can.
Yeah, 6 in the morning works for me.
Well, I have to get clearance from my office first, so I make my own arrangements. It's not allowed. But yeah, tentatively. Yeah, it's struggling. Yeah, it is. Okay. Oh, it gets way too hard after that. We can get into the next week. The only question I've got, Brian, is just in terms of Nigel Muir's submission from Sports Tasman around his concern that we haven't got enough feedback from different community groups.
Sports groups.
And whether that's come through or not, and whether we would hear a different perspective.
I've looked at the list of submissions as every group whether it's schools or what's quite listed here.
Did you just want me to comment on who the list went to in the first instance? Yeah. So we sent a letter to organisations who work with Māori in the district, including all the 8 iwi who have an interest, and all the gaming societies. Then we sent an email letting them know about the consultation to people that had previously submitted in 2013, which was the last round of consultation that you did, as well as the people in the 2016 review who we did some pre-consultation with. That was quite an eclectic group. Included in that was Sport Tasman, and Sport Tasman sent that email out to all their sports groups. So, and I did check with them whether that email went, and yes, it had gone to all those sports groups. So that's what we did. So no, we didn't specifically reach out. As Nikki mentioned there, we did do a article in Nelson, and it was of course in our on our website, and it also got a feature in the Nelson Mail that the consultation was on. Yeah.
Discussed over, I think, over 2 meetings.
Yeah. Thank you, yes, and of course at Community in Whānau there was a presentation.
Done enough, from reviewing it, Gabrielle, you think there's a good, is there anything you go, we've got a gap, as we look through and go, we'd expect to have got some feedback from this segment of the community and we haven't got it?
I think in respect of people that are concerned about funding, sports groups are the major beneficiaries of funding from pub charities. That's partly because they have a more limited pool of funders that will actually support them, whereas gaming trusts is often a primary sector that they support. And as you've seen, we've got some good submissions from that group. I mean, there are gaps. Arts, but I don't think we received any submissions from arts groups, and they get money from pub charities or from gaming trusts as well. But the question is firstly, were they unaware, or did they just not see the need to submit on this? And secondly, would they be saying anything other than the views that you've heard today? I think probably the central arguments have been put in front of you today. Concern for funding, or the impact of funding of a policy change, the potential impact on the industry from policy change, and the harm that it causes to communities.
Okay, I think it's one of those things that sometimes you don't get the submissions because actually some organisations don't actually particularly like fronting up to acknowledge that they receive money from gaming trusts, to be honest. It's, you know, it's very much viewed often as a necessary evil and not something that you really want to, some organisations acknowledge. And I've certainly seen plenty of community organisations who have gone through that dilemma that was discussed with that last submission of going, well, you know, what do we do? Do we apply or not apply? And I've, you know, that's a conversation I've heard many a time around a committee table. We've probably got what we're going to get.
I noticed that Matt McMillan had said he wanted to speak. Was there a reason why he didn't speak today? Okay. Is there another, if he's put down on his submission that he wishes to speak, is it possible to hear from him at another stage? How?
Through the chair, we wouldn't normally try and reschedule one submitter who had a slot and then said he couldn't actually make it.
Okay. No, I missed it.
I know that some of the commentary I'll talk about is Jane Curran.
Oh, I know that. I just think that someone who's actually working on the cold face, it would have been helpful to have heard from him in person. Was that offer? Was he offered that?
I talked to Toby today.
Okay.